Disgraced hockey coach Graham James receives a 2-year prison term. He pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting 2 junior players in the 80s and 90s. The Crown had asked for a 6-year sentence. So it happened just about an hour and a half ago. Former junior hockey coach Graham James convicted for the sexual assault of 2 former hockey players. He received 2 years. That sentence strongly criticized by the victims, Todd Holt and Theo Fleury. Many others are wondering if it's enough online. A lot of outrage over this sentence. Judge Catherine Carlson noted James appears able to control his desires since he has not reoffended. She also said she wanted to send a message that crimes of this type won't be tolerated. So, does 2 years strike that balance? Let's get the view of Andrew Barbacki. Andrew Barbacki is a criminal lawyer and a former Crown prosecutor, and he joins me from Montreal. First of all, Andrew, what's your reaction to the 2-year sentence today?
Well, I was just reading the judgment. Actually, I only got it a couple of minutes ago. I got, I think, to about paragraph 16. So I haven't read it in its entirety, but so far I find it very well reasoned. To me, it makes a lot of sense.
Oh, okay.
I realize that from a victim's point of view, and perhaps from the public's as well, you know, no amount of punishment is sufficient. That's part of the problem. There's even been lately a little bit of mutterings about a death penalty debate, you know. So in terms, from the point of view of aggrieved victims, as I say, their lives are pretty much affected permanently, and I don't think that any amount of time really makes them feel better.
Andrew, here's what I'm curious about. Graham James has already been convicted and sentenced for another group of sexual assaults, including one on Sheldon Kennedy in 1997. He received 3.5 years the first time out. This time, he got 2 years. I mean, since when do repeat offenders get decreased sentences?
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing, you see, is because it's not a repeat offense. These offenses occurred at the same period of time as the ones he was sentenced for 15 years ago. That's, I think, what the misinformation is. And the judge clearly says that, even in the part of the judgment I've read, you know, is that these offenses, had they been disclosed, Mr. James would have been sentenced in 1997 for, I believe, a total of 4 victims instead of 2 or 1. You know, I'm sorry I can't be completely prepared for this as I would be for one of my own cases, but that's very, very clear. So the question is what would his sentence have been in 97 had these 2, I believe it's 2 additional victims here. And it's not only a mathematical issue, as the judge says, because we've had the lapse of time, and the judge takes great pains not to blame the 2 people who didn't come forward back then. And as the judge, and I agree, it's not up to me to give bouquets, but clearly it's enormously difficult to come public with this kind of allegations. People who are victimized in this kind of way, they're traumatized for life, and it takes, I think it's entirely understandable that in 1997, when the 2 current victims heard about this, I don't know how many people would have said, oh, geez, I might as well come forward with my dark secret as well, you know? So it's entirely understandable, but, you know, it's a balancing exercise, and you have to look at it as well from the point of view of the offender. He has not committed any offenses. As a matter of fact, the ones he was sentenced for in 97 were committed quite a while before he was actually sentenced in 97. They were what's called historical offenses. So were these. So it's not as if he got out. I mean, had he committed these offenses after he was released from prison on his first sentence, that would be a completely different ballgame.
Okay, Andrew, I'm not a lawyer, which may become painfully obvious to you on my next question, but what's that got to do with the price of tea in China? I mean, let's say he was a murderer, and the judge said, well, you know, it's been 18 years since he murdered somebody, so we can go easy on the guy. Let's just drop this down to some other sentence like manslaughter and leave it there, because it's clear for 18 years he hasn't murdered anybody.
Well, what I'm saying is that you referred to this as a 2-year sentence. In effect, it's 2 years tacked on to the 3.5, and it's 2 years imposed after being out of prison, now going back in. It's something hanging over a person's head since 97. So And to be fair, I know, I'm sorry to play lawyer with you, but if you check the tape, what you said, since when do sentences become lower when somebody reoffends? That's the word you used, was reoffending. He has not reoffended.
No, but my second go at that, though, was why well, I mean, I know what you're saying, but I'm saying why in this particular case would you have a scenario where now I'm confused. But my point was, Andrew, is that if it had have been something like murder, then the judge wouldn't have taken that tact of reasoning. It doesn't seem to me.
Well, he would have in any, or she would have in any other case that doesn't have a minimum penalty. And again, I won't play lawyer with you, but there are, you know, there's a mandatory minimum penalty for say the murder, for murder. But you know, to tell you the truth, because of the fact that the stigma and these so-called twin myths and this difficulty in disclosing, the sentences aren't really that much lower for historical, what we call historical sex cases.
Right.
In other words, had these cases been detected immediately, the sentence wouldn't have been enormously higher, if at all.
Okay.
You know,
here's what Sheldon Kennedy had to say. He said, in our system, the bar has been set low. He said, it's not a sentence that we want to see, meaning him and I assume Greg and the others. The trauma is something that the sentencing doesn't even come close to showing the damage that's been done.
Right.
What's your reaction to that? I mean,
in the abstract, in isolation, I agree with that statement. And I think I said that at the outset, is that no amount of punishment, including the death penalty in murder cases, no amount of punishment of somebody can really give somebody back their identity, their self-worth, their self-esteem, their sexual, whatever you call it, you know, ability to function.
Dignity.
And, you know, you cannot give that back. And had he been given a 30-year sentence, I don't think that the difference in the lives of the victims would change that much. And that's why I think the more modern view, and countries which are criticized as left-leaning, which have much lower crime rates than we do, they go more on devoting resources towards prevention and rehabilitation. And people will call me a tree hugger, but if you look at the literature, the people with the PhDs, they say that after-the-fact punishment is not a deterrent. And in fact, in the United States, that the murder rate is higher in states with the death penalty. It's higher than in Canada. It's the highest just about in the civilized world.
But in this case, again, you know, if you listen to what Sheldon Kennedy had to say, he said that he had been through much more rehabilitation than than Graham James had.
Right. No, I agree with that. And as I say, I don't want my comments to be interpreted as being anti-victim. I deal with them. I see them even as a defense lawyer. You see what the ravages these things cause. As a prosecutor, I dealt with things like that. And I don't want anybody to think that I or anybody in my line of work has less sympathy for victims. But I do not think, you have to realize that the sentencing regime cannot make that better. And I don't think, as I said at the outset, there's some perhaps degree of outrage on the part of the victims, but had this sentence come down as being double or triple what it was, I don't think that it would have really helped their lives that much, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's also the issue, though, if people are are infuriated, you know, by a crime, they want to see that reflected in the sentencing. Right. Criminal lawyer, former Crown prosecutor Andrew Barbacki, thank you for taking the time to speak with me from Montreal. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for your hospitality.